Welcome to the platform, sir, to the University College of Law, Osmania University. So, before I invite you to deliver the lecture, sir is a professor of law and principal, University Law College, Bangalore, University Bangalore, and of course, sir has got many has been into many academic uh, uh, posts and experience. And of course, the highest of it is Sir has worked as Vice Chancellor, Acting Vice Chancellor of Karnataka State Rural Development and Panchayat Raj University, Gadag, from 8th August 2019 to 26th May 2020. Sir also worked as First Registrar, Karnataka State Rural Development and Panchayat Raj University, Gadag, from 14th December 2016 to 17th June 2020. And sir also worked as the first registrar evaluation of and registrar in charge of Karnataka State Law University, and finance officer in charge of Karnataka State Law University, Hubli, during 2009 and 10. And of course, sir has many more such kind of an academic experiences. And not only that, not only the academic experience, of course, sir also has assisted the government in framing the policies, especially to mention a few of them. Sir assisted the Ministry of Law, Justice, Human Rights and Parliamentary Affairs, Government of Karnataka, Bangalore, in formulation of its policy and action plan during 2004 to 5, and drafted Karnataka Rural Employment Guarantee Bill 2005 and Industrial Disputes Bill 2005, Karnataka Amendment, which have been accepted by the ministry. Sir also assisted the Department of Rural Development and Panchayat Raj, Government of Karnataka, Bangalore, in formulation of RDPR University Bill 2016. Sir also served as ex officio member of Karnataka Law Commission, Government of Karnataka, Bangalore, during 2014 and 16. Apart from this, of course, sir was awarded with many awards, and the first, to name a few of them is sir received Best Research Paper Award for a paper on impact of globalization and liberalization on labor market regulatory laws in India in the International Conference on Law, Regulations and Public Policy 2016 held at Singapore. And sir also received Prosaha Award for service to the children of Sri Rakum School for the Blind from Acharya Rakumji Ashram, Bangalore, in 2017. Sir also received Best Paper Presentation Award for presentation of a paper on initiatives for rural development, a unique experiment in Karnataka, in the National Conference on Developed Village, Developed Nation, organized by AICTE and IEC SME, New Delhi, on 29th and 30th October 2017. Not only the awards, apart from this, of course, sir has published many books. To name a few of them, a book entitled Working Women's Rights has been published by Karnataka Institute for Law and Parliamentary Reform, Government of Karnataka, Bangalore, in August 2008, with an ISBN number. Of course, a book entitled Law of Resolution of Industrial Disputes has been published by Karnataka Institute for Law and Parliamentary Reforms, Government of Karnataka, Bangalore, in 2008, with an ISBN number. Written self-learning material on subject Industrial Law and Service Law for LLM and PG Diploma in Law courses, respectively, for the Department of Studies and Research in Law, Mysore. Then, of course, sir has got a membership in many different administrative bodies and committees, and he has got an research experience, and conducted a research project as a principal investigator under UGC major research project on the topic entitled The Prevailing Lacunas in Implementation of the Right of Children to Free and Compulsory Education Act 2009 in Karnataka State, an assessment. And of course, sir also has guided, has a guidance and presentation and publications, etc., in many national as well as international journals. And of course, 8 research scholars are pursuing at present their PhD program, and 7 scholars have already been awarded PhD degrees, and 5 scholars have completed their MPhil in law under sir's guidance. And of course, sir, as a resource person and also as a paper presenter, has participated into around 25 international and national seminars and conferences, and published around 40 research papers in national and international journals. With this brief introduction, sir, I now invite you and welcome you to the University College of Law's platform to deliver a lecture to the participants. So welcome you, sir, and over to you, sir. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Dr. Radhika.
It's a pleasure, sir. It's a pleasure.
Nice introduction, and I take this opportunity to thank my senior friend and my great well-wisher, Dr. G.B. Reddy, Dean Faculty of Law, for recommending me to be part of this FDP program as a resource person. And I also thank Dr. Vijay Lakshmi, coordinator of the program at Principal University Law College, for inviting me to this program, and also thank Dr. Irfan, faculty ULC Osmania, for talk to me and obtaining my brief CV. So at the outset, I take this opportunity to congratulate the principal and all the faculty members of Osmania University for organizing such a useful program, faculty development program, particularly during this pandemic. My special compliments to all of you. In fact, this is a very novel idea wherein we can really engage ourselves in serious academic activities. We can hone our skills, we can improve our knowledge. The topic that is assigned to me today is legal research and labor issues. Since I am specialized in the area of labor law, and I have been teaching labor law for the last almost 24-25 years, and considering that, Professor G.B. Reddy might have thought it fit to invite me to speak on this particular subject. As far as the legal research is concerned, many of the predecessor resource persons might have discussed about the concept of legal research, the research and the concept of legal research, the procedure for the research and all those aspects. But not to spend more time on that, briefly I would like to spare my some time just to explain that. You all know legal research is very important. The main object of the legal research is to verify. Of course, the very object of the research or legal research is to find out new information or to verify whether we need to bring any change in the legislation or in any provisions of the law needs to be amended, or a new law is required to be enacted, or the law which is already existing is outdated and needs to be repealed. So these are the various purposes for which we undertake legal research in different areas. And in fact, when we thought of doing a research in the area of law, be it either labor law or constitutional law, company law, property law, or family law, or human rights law, or it may be environmental law, IPR law, cyber law, whatever the law it is, we have to first decide as to in which area or which specialization of law we have to conduct the research. Okay, it is better if the researcher undertakes research in the area of his specialization in his master's degree, so that he will be having a deep understanding about a particular law, and he will be having some rough idea as to where is the problem in a particular area of specialization in specialized area of law, so that he can conduct a research and he can move further deep into the field, and he can try to explore or try to identify the gray areas which needs to be reformed. As we all belong to law faculty, we are very well aware that the whole purpose of law is to provide a systematic rules and regulations with an intention to regulate the behavior of the individuals and to enable all the citizens or individuals to have a peaceful living with and conducting their activities within the framework of the law. That is very, very important. Okay, So whether we can do any trade, business, or any other activity, it has to be within the framework of the law. And another important aspect of object of law is to facilitate the individuals to do their business and live their life very peacefully, happily, conducting their activities within the framework of the law. So with this intention, of course, we need to, as law, as all of us are well aware, that law is not a static subject. It is a dynamic subject. So we need to change the law according to the changing needs of the situation. The law which was existing 10 years back may not be of much use today, or we may need to enact new laws. We may encounter with new problems. For example, 10, 15, 20 years back, we were not in need of the information technology law, or what we call it as cyber law. Information technology law is a cyber law of India. Okay, or we were not worried much about the intellectual property laws. But now that is the most emerging area, and in order to uh, uh, prevent the cyber law, cyber crimes, and all, we need to strengthen the cyber law. So, like that, even in the area of labor law, we need to we have so many gray areas wherein a researcher can very well undertake the research. So, as I was mentioning you about the identification of the field of research, it is the first and foremost duty of the researcher to verify or to get himself confirmed as to which area a research is to be conducted. Once the area or field of research in a particular field of specialization of law is identified, then next step, as we all know, is to identify the specific topic for the research. Okay, even in the labor law, we have hundreds of labor laws. Okay, some dealing with employment, some dealing with social security, welfare, health, then so many other aspects. So we cannot do research on all these laws. Then we'll have to concentrate on a particular specific labor law. It may be either payment labor law relating to wages, or law relating to contract labor, or law relating to industrial relations. So like that, we have to identify a particular topic. Even in case of law relating to industrial relations itself, we have so many areas. We cannot do a research in the whole area of industrial relations. Then it will become very wide, very vast, or unwieldy. So it will be difficult for us to, in fact, to conduct a research on all the aspects of the industrial relations, and it will give, and we also have to look into the constraint of time, because any research is required to be done within a specific time limit. It may be 3 or 4 years, or maximum as provided under the UGC is 7 years. So we cannot just do the research for any number of years. That is also have to be taken into consideration. And while deciding the topic should be the relevant one, and it should have contemporary relevance. So if the topic of research is old and is of no use and have no contemporary relevance, then the research will not have yield any useful result, because the purpose of any research is to bring change or transformation in the legal system, and also bring change and transformation in the welfare and well-being of the people. Ultimate goal of any research, the outcome of any research should be beneficial to the people, or more particularly a particular purpose, people for whose benefit a particular law has been enacted. So otherwise, merely doing research for the sake of doing it with an intention to earn our doctoral degree and to get some increments, or for the benefit of promotion, of course, partially that will be also one of the objectives, but that itself should not be the sole objective. Okay, so apart from that, the research, the outcome of the research must be of some use to the society, some use to the particular persons or targeted group for whose benefit and welfare and well-being a particular law has been enacted. So otherwise, the very purpose of conducting the research will be defeated. Okay, so once the topic is decided, then we'll have to move forward for review of literature. So the researcher before the framing of the scheme of research, we need to have a thorough research or a thorough verification of or review of the available literature, be it either the enacted legislations or the decisions rendered by high courts and supreme courts on a particular area, or the commentaries or recommendations of any commissions or committees which have been appointed with an intention to give the recommendations, or the articles on a particular point of law or a particular issue, then the journals. So these are all, or even we can search in the net now with push of a button. Every one of us know very well we can have access to any amount of information. Okay, if we make use of the information that is available in the internet, but all that appears in the internet are available may not be taken just like that unless the veracity of that is verified. Okay, sometimes if we carry the wrong information that is available in the internet, then it will totally divert the research. Okay, though we may end up with the wrong results. So we have to be very careful. And once the review literature is reviewed properly on a particular issue or a particular point of law, then we need to have to adopt.
Hello, hello.
Can you hear me? Hello.
Yes, sir. We can hear you, sir. Sorry,
Okay,
sir. There was some
Okay.
interruption, unintended interruption.
Then we need to decide about the methodology. So what method is to be followed for conduct of a particular research? So there are different methods, as you know, popular methods of research. Many of us apply are doctrinal research. You know very well what is doctrinal research. We will have to study in depth about the existing laws, legal provisions, then commentaries, or of course there are two types of the resources available, that is primary source and the secondary source, like journals, commentaries in the journals, documents, etc. So on the basis of the in-depth study and opinions given by the different experts in the field, we will arrive at a particular conclusion. Okay, of course the thing which we feel appropriate. So okay, we'll arrive at that particular conclusion, and we may say that the opinion given by so and so in a particular case or in a particular journal is not proper. It could have been like this and all that. So this is totally doing a research by studying the books, textbooks, or journals, or case laws, or legislations, etc. And on the basis of that, we will do. And another important the methodology is that of non-doctrinal research, what we call it as empirical research. And sometimes our research may be partly doctrinal and partly non-doctrinal. So few chapters may be of doctrinal in nature and few chapters may be non-doctrinal. The main object of conduct of the non-doctrinal research or empirical research, what we call it as empirical research, is to actually verify the existing conditions in the field. So we say that there is a suppose we undertake a research on the issue of child labor. So merely sitting in the library or in some place reading articles or verifying the decisions and coming to a particular conclusion will not be of much use. In such circumstances, we need to move out of the library or our place of study, and we'll have to see in the field. So whether the child labor is in existence in a particular place, whether it is rampant. So whether child labor, the child labor is being exploited in a particular place. So whether children who are employed in a particular activity, maybe either industry, factory, hotel, or whatever it is. So to what extent their basic human rights are protected, whether they are given proper food, proper wage. So in order to verify this, merely sitting in a library or in a particular place by reading and making analysis of the opinions given by different persons, we will not be able to actually identify the truth or the ground realities. Okay, so in order to identify the ground realities, what is the actual problem, what is the real problem in the field, and what will be the impact of the application or existence of a particular thing. We need to move out and do the research. We have to collect the data by interviewing the persons, by administering the questionnaire. The questionnaire may be either open-ended questionnaire or it may be closed questionnaire. I hope you know very well as to what is open-ended and closed questionnaire. Closed questionnaire is one wherein we have a structured questionnaire and we'll administer to the respondents, and we'll ask them to just say yes or no or tick. The propositions are already made by the researcher. Then open-ended questions are those wherein we'll ask them to give their opinion, and they will be free to express their opinion. Okay, so on the basis of the opinion collected through the interview or questionnaire, either open-ended or closed one, we can make an analysis, okay, of the data which is collected, and we can, on the basis of that, derive a conclusion. Okay, so this is another mode of research. Then we have also descriptive mode, then comparative research. For example, the working of the adjudication machinery or labor dispute resolution machinery in India, England, and America or Australia. So making a comparison, or like the child labor in India and other countries. So like that, we can make a comparative analysis. That is what we call it as comparative method of research. Then analytical method, we have to make an analysis of the laws or prevailing situations in a particular place or in one country with another country. Then qualitative research, quantitative research. So these are all the known methods of research we can use, we can adopt in our research depending upon the topic on which we are conducting the research. The next important aspect is that, as all of you know, is hypothesis. So what do you mean by hypothesis? Hypothesis is a specific, clear, and testable proposition and predictive statement about possible outcome of a specific research study. So it is a proposition, it is an assumption that a particular thing could be like this. So it may or may not be. So the researcher at the time of initiation of his research, in the beginning of the research, may be having a particular notion or an idea that the the child labor problem is rampant in Hyderabad or in Bangalore or in hotel industry, okay, or in construction industry. Okay, so like that, we'll make a proposition, or we'll make an assumption regarding the existence of a particular fact, which may or may not be proved. Of course, that is what we call it as testing of hypothesis. Whatever proposition we make in the beginning of the study, we need to have to test it on the basis of the research we have conducted, on the basis of data we have collected and analysis we have made. Okay, so hypothesis is another important aspect in every research. And of course, sometimes there need not be any hypothesis, particularly in the doctrinal research. Usually, sometimes some researches will be conducted even without the hypothesis also. So these are some of the important aspect of our procedure for conduct of the research, even in the field of in the legal field. So in order to understand these aspects in more detail, I would like to deal with some specific examples of doing research in a particular field. For example, in order to conduct study regarding functioning of adjudicatory machinery under Industrial Disputes Act. So you may be well aware that Industrial Disputes Act has been enacted in 1947 with an intention to regulate industrial relations. Industrial relations is nothing but regulation of industrial relations is nothing but regulation of relations between the employer and the workman. Okay, industry you know very well. Industry means any systematic activity conducted with the cooperation between employer and employer, employer and workman and workman. Okay, then that is a systematic activity for the purpose of production, distribution, supply of goods or services. Okay, and there are curtain of cases where definition of the term industry itself has been subject matter of interpretation before the Honorable Supreme Court. In some cases, particularly in Rajappa's case, which is famous case, that is what is called as here Rajappa versus BWSSB, Bangalore Water and Sewerage Board, whereby decided in 1978 by Justice Krishna. He was Justice Krishna delivered a majority decision in that particular case, wherein the Supreme Court has held that anything and everything can be an industry, wherein there is a systematic activity conducted with the cooperation between employer and workman for the purpose of production, distribution and supply of goods or services. So accordingly, even the court held that even lawyers' chamber is an industry. Number of persons employed is more. With the help of them, if the lawyer is rendering service, even educational institutions have been held as industry. Even the hospitals have been held as an industry. And even now also, the matter is not yet settled finally as to what is industry, what is not industry. Still the controversy is going on. Of course, it is not yet reached any finality, and still the Rajappa's case holds good. Okay, so like that, when they in an industry, as you know very well, that we have the workman as well as employer. Employer is one who may be owner of the industry, it may be a company or a partnership firm, and workers are those who are employed to carry out the work. So normally there will be a dispute between the employer and workman, because the workman who have worked hard always feels that they should have to have better share in the profit of the employer. They should have better service conditions, okay, or better privileges, monetary benefits in the form of bonus or in the form of any other benefits like leave and regular payment of wage. So, or some of the facilities, housing facility, whatever it is. Then employer having invested money and putting all his efforts. So always it is it's a natural tendency that he should keep major share in the profit. So then it leads to conflict between the employer and workman, because workman wants to have make demands for their due, and employer wants to retain more for himself. So in such circumstances, there is every possibility of arisal of a dispute, and sometimes even dispute may occur when the workman, a particular worker who has done some misconduct. It may be coming late to the work, or it may be causing any damage or destruction to the property, or it may be doing the work negligently. So like that, under such circumstances, the employer can initiate action on him. Okay, if the employer terminates the service of the worker, then in such circumstances, the worker who is terminated by service, removed from employment, may not happily go out of the employment, because particularly in the present situation, the lack of availability of employment, or because of unemployment problem, finding employment itself is a big thing. Okay, in such circumstances, naturally, the workman who has been removed from service will ask for reinstatement, and the employer, if he agrees, it is well and good. The employer who has terminated may not allow him to come back. So in such circumstances, the naturally disputes occurs. When any dispute occurs, either it is individual dispute between the employer and workman in case of dismissal, discharge, retrenchment, or otherwise termination, or it may be a case of collective dispute, or what we call it as right disputes. Okay, interest disputes. That is a dispute between employer and a group of workers, more than one worker, which are considered as industrial disputes. Okay, so dispute may be for claim of bonus, or claim of increase in the or hike in the salaries. Usually the workers will demand for increase in the wages once in 3 years or once in 5 years and all that. So in such circumstances, the disputes will occur. So in order to resolve these disputes, because in the interest of society, in the interest of the nation, as well as in the interest of the workers as well as the employers, we need to have peaceful industrial relations between employer and workman for conduct of or carrying out of smooth productional activities in a smooth manner. Because in case of any industrial strife, maybe either strike or whatever it is, if the activities are stopped, then it will badly affect the employer, because of loss of production. He will be losing his clients, will be losing his sale and all, and even the workers who have been removed from employment will also suffer due to non-availability of alternative employment, or even sustenance, means of sustenance, and even society as a large and the nation at large will also suffer in case if there is a rampant strikes, lockouts, or closure of industries and all that. So that's the reason why the industries need to be the activities need to be conducted in a smooth manner to ensure the productional activities in the industries in the interest of all the players, including the society, the nation, the employer, and the workman, and all that. So in order to resolve the disputes, the Industrial Disputes Act provides a machinery for resolution of disputes, that is to resolve the disputes. So of course, Industrial Disputes Act provides provides for the direct resolution of dispute through amicable means between the employer and the workman. Both the employer and workman, or you can say it as disputing parties, can sit across the table and resolve the disputes. Okay, this is what we even call it as collective bargaining. Means bargaining collectively by the employer and workman by sitting across the table and crashing out their disputes. And of course, it is considered to be one of the best method of resolution of the dispute, wherein there will be no feeling of winning and losing on either side of the parties. Okay, so otherwise, in case of compulsory adjudication, one party will lose and one party will win. The loser will always carry in the mind that he has lost the case and he will have to take revenge on the other side. And in case if the workers are losers, then they also carry in the mind and they always wait for an opportunity to teach a lesson to the employer by adopting go slow method, or any such causing loss or damage or destruction to the property of the employer and all that. So any of such thing is detrimental to the interest of the employer and the workman, as well as to the nation at large and the society which is depending on the service of a particular industry. So in such circumstances, in case if the dispute is not resolved, then the law also provides for resolution of dispute through conciliation. A conciliator can also invite both the parties and try to resolve the dispute. If both the parties agree, then there can be an agreement. And of course, conciliation officer cannot compel the parties and cannot tell them you must resolve the dispute through negotiation and all that. Then, in case if the parties fail to resolve the dispute themselves through collective bargaining or fails to arrive at settlement before the conciliation officer, under section 10 of the Industrial Disputes Act, there is a provision for reference of dispute by the appropriate government. The appropriate government, because government as a representative of the society is also interested in the smooth functioning of the industries in the state or in the nation. So appropriate government may be either state government or the central government. There is a definition of the term appropriate government defined under Industrial Disputes Act. The central government is an appropriate government in case of industries run and established, run and controlled by the central government. For example, Air Authority of India, Railways, or Postal Department, or any such organization, Steel Authority of India, or Dock Board, and all that. And in the case of other industries which are established and controlled by the state government, then state government will be considered as appropriate government. And also in case if the industry is having its branches in more than one state, the appropriate government can be a central government. Okay, so these are some of the important aspects that are provided under Industrial Disputes Act. Okay, so when the dispute is not resolved either directly between the parties or through conciliation, then invariably the government will enter. Government will have to enter to the field, and the government is given a discretionary power under the provisions of Industrial Disputes Act to refer the dispute to the Board of Conciliation or Court of Inquiry or Labor Court, Industrial Tribunal, or the National Tribunal. Okay, so again, Board of Conciliation, some of you may be aware that it is a board consisting of 2 or 3 persons constituted by the government. And again, board will invite both the parties, try to resolve the dispute. If the parties agree, then there can be an agreement. Otherwise, if the parties refuse to agree, then board also cannot pass any order compelling parties to enter into agreement or to abide by that. Okay, in such cases, then even the settlement is failed before the Board of Conciliation, then ultimately the matter will have to be referred to Labor Court and Industrial Tribunal. Okay, Labor Courts and Industrial Tribunal are the National Tribunal. If the matter of dispute is pertaining to the disputes, the subjects which are specified in Schedule 2, appended to Industrial Dispute Act, then the matter is to be referred to Labor Court or Industrial Tribunal. If it is as provided in 3, Schedule 3, then matter is to be referred to National Tribunal. And particularly when the industry is situated in more than one state, then it is the central government which will make a reference to the National Tribunal. These are all some of the aspects involved in the law. Okay, the now point here is that when labor courts, industrial National Tribunal have been established under the provisions of Industrial Disputes Act with an intention to provide speedy justice to the aggrieved party, maybe either employer or workman. Okay, so in such cases, the law provides for resolution of dispute within 3 months, particularly in case of individual disputes. Individual disputes are nothing but dispute between a particular worker and the employer. It may be in case of dismissal or discharge. So dismissal is nothing but removing the employee from the service on the ground that he has committed some misconduct. Misconduct. What is misconduct? A conduct which is not, which is against the rules and regulations. That employee is required to report to the work on at a particular time. If he fails, he comes late. If he is a habitual latecomer, or he is required to discharge his duty very diligently, if he casual and careless, as a result of which he causes any loss, or if he commits theft, or if he takes up quarrel with the supervisor, manhandles him, or scolds him. So these are all actions which are considered as misconduct under the provisions of the law, particularly under the Standing Orders Act, which clearly deals with what would amount to misconduct on the part of employer and all those employees. So in such circumstances, there will be an inquiry initiated by the employer, and on the basis of recommendation of the inquiry officer, the employer can initiate action by maybe either reducing the increment, or it may be even terminating him from the service. So in such circumstances, the aggrieved employee, if the employee feels that he has not committed such a grave mistake wherein he could be removed from employment. For example, in one of the cases, in fact, as I am specialized in labor law, before joining my service, regular teaching service, I was few years I practiced in the labor courts. I was appearing for the trade unions on behalf of the employees. So in one of the cases, the employee, while going home after completion of his work, uh, he was subjected to security check. You know, in the industries, while entering as well as at the time of exit, they will be subject to security check. So while going out of the industry after his completion of his work hours, he was subjected to check, and he was found with some 50 to 100 grams of soap powder, as he was working in a soap manufacturing company. Okay, of course, it is Hindustan Lever's famous company, and wherein the management taking opportunity, since they were not happy with the workman involving in trade union activities and all that, they wanted to teach him a lesson, and accordingly, he was they initiated proceedings against him, disciplinary proceedings against him, and in the disciplinary proceedings, the inquiry officer, usually inquiry officers will be either the officers officers working in the industry, or in order to be more impartial, sometimes the management will appoint some advocates to conduct the inquiry. The inquiry officers who are appointed by the management and who are paid by the management, usually they will be biased towards the employers. Okay, so the inquiry officer has given a report holding him guilty of theft of 100 grams of soap powder, wheel powder. Okay, as he was working in a wheel manufacturing plant. So, and management taking this serious note of it, they have removed him from the employment, terminated from the service. Then the aggrieved workman approached the labor court against the management, contending that the termination of his service is bad, even though it is proved that he has committed a mistake, committed a theft of carrying 100 grams of wheel powder. Of course, he took a plea that I was not carrying it intentionally. Somehow it has fallen in my pocket while discharging my duty or in a packing division and all that. It is quite possible sometimes, or even if he has carried intentionally, but it is not that grave a mistake or a serious mistake wherein it could attract with the punishment, highest punishment of dismissal from the service. Okay, so accordingly, he has approached the labor court, and labor court ultimately given award stating that the award of punishment, the punishing him with the highest punishment of termination from service is bad, and it is of course a harsh punishment. As we are all law people, we know very well that the punishment should be proportionate to that of the gravity of the mistake. Even in case of IPC, we'll give different types of punishment to different kinds of offenses. For murder, the punishment is different. For a grievous hurt is different, or a simple hurt is different, for theft is different, for dacoity is different, like that. Okay, so accordingly, the dispute sometimes will occur wherein the law provides that under Industrial Disputes Act, it is stated that such individual disputes have to be resolved within 3 months. Within 3 months, this is very important. Then, in case of other disputes, maybe regarding the dispute relating to the strike, it may be whenever the strike occurs, you can say that there is a dispute between employer and workman, wherein the workers will be demanding something and employer is not agreeing for that, either wholly or partially. So the employer refuses to accept their demands, and if the employees insist for considering their demands, then there will be an industrial strike or a dispute. So such disputes for enhancement of salary or providing of some facilities or payment of bonus, etc. These are all common disputes which will occur in any industry. So wherein, in fact, the dispute will be referred to the labor court, tribunal, etc. by the appropriate government, because particularly in case of such collective disputes, they cannot directly take it to the labor court or industrial tribunal. There is a procedure of requesting the state government or the central government, as the case may be, and the government will in turn have to refer that dispute for adjudication before labor court or industrial tribunal or the national tribunal, as the case may be. So in such circumstances, even in case of such interest disputes, as per the law, as provided under Industrial Disputes Act, the disputes have to be resolved within 6 months. Okay, so now the scope for research in this is that whether the labor courts or industrial tribunal to whom a matter is referred or before whom a dispute is raised, either individual dispute or industrial dispute. Of course, the individual dispute is deemed to be industrial dispute in case of dismissal, discharge, retrenchment, and all. To that effect, there is an amendment done way back in 1987 itself, particularly in some states like Andhra, Karnataka, and all that. So, wherein, of course, there is a central amendment also, whereby they have incorporated section 2 capital A, which is called as deemed industrial dispute, though it is not an industrial dispute, because due to paucity of time I cannot deal with all these things in detail. Okay, it is called as deemed industrial dispute. So wherein in either of the cases the disputes have to be resolved either in 3 months or 6 months. Maximum period provided is 6 months. So now the question or the scope for our research here is that whether labor court and industrial tribunals are functioning effectively and efficiently and have been rendering justice or resolving the disputes within the stipulated period of time, the time stipulated under the Industrial Disputes Act, that is 3 months or 6 months. So this will be a good area wherein we can do the research. Okay, so thereby we can verify whether labor court and industrial tribunals are resolving the disputes within the time limit which is provided under the law. If not, so this is of course a proposition, or it is an assumption. The researcher may go with an assumption, of course, out of his knowledge of reading books, reading commentaries, journals, articles in the journals, or out of his experience by interaction with the trade unions or management people, whatever it is. So he may go with a proposition that labor court and industrial tribunals are not, of course it is an hypothesis, not functioning effectively and efficiently, as they have not been able to dispose of the disputes within the stipulated period of time. So this has to be verified. This proposition or our assumption is to be proved. How it is to be proved? Then we have to adopt a method. Okay, that is what we call it as a methodology to be adopted. It may be doctrinal method and some. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We are able.
Okay. So in such cases, of course, we can have both doctrinal and non-doctrinal method of research. So wherein first three, four 3 to 4 chapter can be devoted for doctrinal research, particularly to trace the history of development or evolution of industrial law in India. Another chapter can be the working of the labor courts and industrial tribunals. That is establishment. That is what we call it as constitution, powers and functions of the labor court and industrial tribunal. Then the procedures that are followed in the labor court and industrial tribunal, and all these things can be part of the doctrinal research. Then we need to also have the non-doctrinal method of research. That is what we call it as empirical research, because merely reading the books, seeing the commentaries and all will not get us the first-hand information as to whether actually labor court and industrial tribunals have been failed in discharging their duty of resolving the disputes within the time limit provided under the law. So in order to do that, we can collect the data by administering questionnaires. Questionnaire, as I have told you, may be actually either open-ended or closed-ended, or it can be a combination of both. We can, as per our idea or as per our knowledge, as per our information, we can structure a questionnaire wherein we can say that the causes for delay in adjudication of disputes by labor court or industrial tribunal is because of delay in reference of dispute by the appropriate government. Then second can be it is because of the strict following of strict procedures and formalities. Of course, the labor courts and industrial tribunals, strictly speaking, are not actually courts, though they have all the similarities of the court, or what we call it as trappings of their court. Okay, they need not have to go into all the procedural formalities and technicalities of what the civil courts follow, which is provided under the Civil Procedure Code. They can go in for the simplified procedure. Okay, they can adopt the method of submission of the what you call the evidence in the written form, and that is examination chip and all that in the written form. Of course, cross examination time can be curtailed, and even submission of their arguments can be in the form of in writing. So written arguments can be submitted. So they need to adopt some new methods, of course, which is already provided under Civil Procedure Code by recent amendments. So wherein the courts can insist for providing of written arguments instead of oral arguments, a lengthy argument just to impress the client. Some advocates are of the habit of taking more time. Okay, so we can avoid unnecessary waste of precious time of the court on a particular matter, so that they can dispose of more number of disputes. And the delay is whether it is because of huge pendency of disputes, or delays because of the lack of inadequate labor courts and industrial tribunals compared to the pendency. The number of courts, labor courts and tribunals which are established and functioning are very less, or it may be because of lack of the appointment of the presiding officers. They are called as presiding officers of the labor court and industrial tribunal. Many a time the presiding officers will not be appointed, and courts or labor courts and tribunals are kept vacant for even years. 1 or 2 years there will be no presiding officers at all. When there is no presiding officer, then the courts will the process of the court, the cases will come to a halt. Okay, so whether it is because of that, or whether it is because the presiding officers are not persons who are specialized in the area of labor law. Okay, so whether there is a need for appointment of persons who are specialized in the area of labor law. So these things, and whether it is because of granting of the adjournments very liberally under the provisions of the rules, industrial disputes rules. the labor court or industrial tribunal can grant 3 adjournments on each side at a maximum of 3 adjournments. Whereas whether the adjournments are given very liberally, whether the court is insisting on the parties to stick to the time schedule and make them to strictly conduct their case, or they just casually go on giving the adjournments as in many civil courts it is being done. So that whether that is the reason for delay, okay, so that also we can verify. Then whether the delay is because of some other reasons like even lack of facilities in the labor courts and industrial tribunals. Many a time the labor courts and industrial tribunals are facing the problem of typists, stenographers. Okay, so there will be one stenographer who is working for 2 to 3 labor courts. Okay, so like that. So then whether the procedure of submission of award to the appropriate government for publication in the official gazette, as it is in the procedure under the Industrial Dispute Act is that the award means the decision of the labor court when it is made, it will not be announced in the open court. It will have to go to the appropriate government. Then the government have to make a publication in the official gazette under section 17. Then it will come into effect operation after expiry of 1 month from the date of publication in the official gazette under section 17A. Then if the appropriate government wants, it can even withhold the operation of the award passed by the labor court or an industrial tribunal on the ground of national interest and national economy and public interest. National economy and public interest term is very wide. The government, if it is not that sensitive to the interest of the workers or interest of the particularly who are the more aggrieved party in case of industrial disputes, so they will just keep it like that. They will sometimes the awards will not be published even for 6 months or 1 year, and if the workers ask them to publish, then the people in authority may say, if you are aggrieved, you can go to court, as some of the officers will be so irresponsible that we'll do whatever we want. If you, at all you are aggrieved, you can go to the court. How can you expect a poor workman who has been terminated from service and who has been fighting the legal battle without any employment since 3-4 years, though the law prescribes that the dispute is to be resolved within 3 months. Okay, so can we expect such the poor workman to go to the court again to get his award notified in the official gazette by the government? Okay, so whether that procedure is responsible for conclusion of the adjudicatory process before the labor court and industrial tribunal, and in some states, of course, except in very few states like Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka and Kerala and all that, there is no power given to labor courts and industrial tribunals for execution of the awards, as we say, execution of decree in case of civil courts. The labor courts are not given, industrial tribunals doesn't have a power of execution. Until very recently, even in Karnataka, we were not having that power. Very recently, the government of Karnataka has made a state amendment and given powers to the labor court to execute their awards on similar lines of that of a decree, execution of a decree by the civil court. Earlier procedure was that in case if the award passed is not honored by the employer, then the procedure was to write to the to make a petition before the collector or district commissioner to initiate action and to recover it as an arrear of land revenue. Okay, as it is, we know very well that even in case of civil courts decrees, even after passing of a decree, to realize the benefits under the decree is a big thing. It is very difficult, isn't it? So we need to again fight for 2-3 years to realize the benefits are under the decree. because merely having degree is of no use. Even if we get some order or a decree from the court or an award from the court, actually benefit has to be realized by the person to whom or in whose favor a decree or an award has been passed. Okay, whether this is the problem. Again, one more problem for getting relief to the aggrieved party. So these are some of the important aspects which we can test. In order to test this, we need to make a structured question as well as open-ended question. We can administer them to the presiding officers of the labor court, then representatives of the employers, then representatives of the workmen or the trade union, and even the advocates who are appearing on behalf of both management as well as on behalf of the workmen. So, on the basis of the information so collected, we'll have to make an analysis. Okay, and even we can refer to the files in the labor court and industrial tribunal in order to verify what is the total number of the what is the total number of cases which have been filed. Of course, there are different category of cases. It may be industrial dispute, which are called as which deals with termination, retrenchment, etc. Well, then we have a category of referred disputes, means the disputes which are referred by the government. Then we have complaints under 33A. In case if the award is not honored, a person aggrieved may file a complaint before the labor court, particularly when the matter is pending before the higher court. There is a rule that in case if the order is made by the labor court in favor of the workman asking for reinstatement, directing for reinstatement with arrears of wage, then he has to be paid with some subsistence amount. If the employer fails to pay that, then under such circumstances, the aggrieved party can make a complaint under 33A of the Industrial Disputes Act. So we can gather information from the registry of the court, wherein we can get the information as to what is the total number of cases filed over a particular period of time. We can take 5 years or 10 years. Then what is the total number of cases disposed of every year? Then what is the average time taken for disposal of the cases? Okay, so that is the age of the case. Then you can also assess the number of adjournments given in a particular case. Okay, as there is a rule, as I've told you, that there should not be more than 3 adjournments given to each of the side. So whether number of adjournments given is very excess. So in some cases it is even hundreds of adjournments are given by the labor courts and tribunals. Then whether labor court and tribunal have been non-functioning for a particular period of time. Okay, so all these data can be collected and you can make an analysis with the help of statisticians and by use of, and it can be represented very systematically by utilizing the tools and techniques, the graphic tools and techniques like bar graph, compound bar graph, or pie chart, or like that. So on the basis of all this, you can come to the conclusion as to what all are the reasons for delay in adjudication. Suppose you come to the conclusion that the presiding officers of the labor court and the industrial tribunal should be persons specialized in the area of labor law. You can make a suggestion, you can recommend an amendment to a particular law, wherein presently the section 7 and 7A of Industrial Disputes Act provides that a person to become presiding officer must be either a judge of the he must be a district judge or a person who has served as district judge for 3 years minimum. So in such circumstances, in fact, people, particularly the judges, don't want to come to the labor court out of their interest, and sometimes they treat it as a kind of punishment to come to the labor court, or it is a kind of below their dignity. Okay, or even if they come also, they will come at the verge of their retirement. So these are some of the practical issues for delay. Then you can make a suggestion that a person with LLM specialized in labor law with 5 years of standing in the bar can be considered as we appoint the consumer court presiding officers who are drawn from the bar. The advocates who have put in 7 years of experience or 10 years of experience, like that. Okay, and also you can make a suggestion, or any advocate who has practice experience of practicing in the labor courts for a period of 7 years, even without LLM. So these are some of the suggestions we can make. Even as we have discussed the problem of reference of dispute, whether reference of dispute is required by the government. Whenever any dispute comes, if the dispute is not resolved directly between the parties, or the dispute is not resolved between the conciliation within 1 year from the date of failure of the conciliation, can the parties directly take the dispute to the labor court? Why unnecessarily they will have to wait for the government? Many a time government will take years to refer the dispute. They will not refer only sometimes. Okay, so that is again causing unnecessary delay in even the commencement of the dispute itself. Then whether in such circumstances you are required to make an amendment to section 10 of the Industrial Disputes Act. Okay, that is the reason why I am telling all these things is to, whenever you do a particular research, the research should orient to bring some change in the existing system of law, and this change in the existing system of law is particularly is with an intention to help the people for whose benefit a law has been enacted. For what purpose a law has been enacted? To realize the purpose for which a law has been enacted. Okay, so then in case if you feel that if there is an opinion, strong evidence to say that we need to give execution powers to the labor courts and industrial tribunals, you are required to make amendment, to bring an amendment. You can suggest, you can recommend an amendment to section 17 of the Industrial Disputes Act, saying that the award passed by labor court industrial tribunal shall become enforceable after expiry of 1 month. 1 month, of course, we have to give time in case if any aggrieved party would like to go in appeal, they can approach the High Court. Of course, there is no appeal against the decision of the labor court industrial tribunal. If at all they are aggrieved, they will have to question it by way of writ before the labor court industrial tribunal on one or the other grounds as they are required to be fulfilled. Okay, so these are some of the specific recommendations we can make to the law, and we can, if they are of course considered, and if such changes are brought into the law, then definitely we can make the adjudicatory system more efficient and effective, and we can really serve the purpose for which a law has been enacted. So this is just one example which I have given with an intention to make you actually understand as to how a intensive research can be carried out, which will be of more use for the society, which will actually serve the purpose. Okay. Then apart from this, there are so many areas in the labor law. It may be child labor, as I've already told you. We have been talking about the menace of child labor since long time. Act was enacted prohibiting child labor way back in 1936, and again a new act was enacted in 1986 providing for regulation and abolition of child labor. Of course, in 1948 itself, the Factories Act was enacted, wherein employment of children below the age of 14 have been totally prohibited in factories, and any such activities which are considered to be factory under the definition of the term factories, considering their tender age, considering their health and other aspects. So despite that, whether we have been able to achieve, we can take up the particular factories or industries in a particular place. It may be either Bangalore, Hyderabad, or whatever area where we stay. We can make then whether the of course we can even conduct a research in the area of health, safety, and welfare measures which are required to be provided under the Factories Act. To what extent the workers have been provided with these measures. So this is again a gray area wherein we can do the research, we can really contribute, we can submit our report, bring it to the notice of the concerned authorities, maybe either government or labor department. We can open their eyes. So whether the factory inspectors who are in charge of, who are imposed with a responsibility and a duty to protect the interest of the workers who are working in factories and all that, are provided with the health, safety, and welfare measures. So it will be a good area wherein we can conduct research. Collective bargaining, I have told you. Then payment of wage. You may be aware of Payment of Wages Act 1936. The object of the Payment of Wages Act is to ensure regularity in payment of wage. That is monthly. If the number of persons employed less than 100, payment wage have to be paid before the 7th day of next month, and if it is more than 100, before 10th day. Whether actually the payment is being made to the people. Otherwise, the purpose of enactment of this law is to see that the wages have to be paid regularly. Otherwise, prior to enactment of this law, the system was that the employers used to pay once in 3 months, once in 4 months. They used to exploit the labor without paying the wages. Okay. So, by considering all that only, the law has been enacted. And also, the another important object of this law is to prevent unauthorized deductions. That is, the law clearly states as to for what purpose the deductions can be made legally out of salary of the employee. If the deduction made by the employer is not covered under the law, then it can be considered as unauthorized deductions. For example, if the employer sustained loss, in order to make good his loss, suppose he deducts 2,000 out of the 8 or 10,000 salary of all the employees, whether it is protected under the law, whether employer is resolved into such activities, and even the employers should not unnecessarily penalize the employee. As I told you, quoted you one case wherein just to curb or suppress the trade union activities, the management has considered the delay in reporting to the duty due to breakdown of the vehicle in which the workers were traveling to reach the establishment. They consider it as a intentional delay and consider it as a flash strike, sudden strike. So thereby they have deducted 8 days wage of all the employees and remitted it to workers welfare fund. Then the reason was that the employees have reached the place of work just half an hour late because of breakdown of the van in which they were traveling to reach the place of work. So then it was challenged. Of course, in such cases, we can make a criminal complaint under Payment of Wages Act before the civil judge, senior division court or magistrate court. Okay. So ultimately, the court came to the conclusion that the deduction of 8 days wage of the worker was punitive and it was not justified, because when the van in which they were traveling itself break down and they could not reach in time, there is no intentional intention on the part of the workers to go late to the place of work. And of course, that is subject to proof. They have made the evidence of. In fact, I only conducted a case. In one of the cases, it happened that we produced the evidence of a person driver who gave evidence that due to failure of this thing machinery, they could not reach in time. And of course, the workers made a call and informed the employer that because of such reason, we are coming just half an hour or 45 minutes late to the establishment. That also they did not consider. So with all those evidences producing before the court, we could able to establish that the deduction of wage is not proper. Then the court has awarded a compensation to the workers. Compensation is 8 times the wage deducted. Suppose they have deducted 2,000, 8 times of 2,000 will be the penalty for the employer for wrongful deductions. So in how many industries the payment wages are paid regularly? In how many industries the employer is unlawfully deducting the wages? What is the impact of that on the workers? We can make a study on that also. Then protection of women and children working in the factories and industries. You may be aware that Factories Act provides special protection to children and women. Of course, it prohibits, as I have told you, the persons below 14 years, 14 to 15 is called a child, and 15 to 18 is called an adolescent. There is a restriction on the number of hours of work. Then even there is a restriction on employment of women during the night shift. Of course, now in many states are liberalizing the labor laws and giving free hand to the employers even to allow the women employees to work in the night shifts. Of course, there are contradictory views of the different high courts like Bombay High Court and Madras High Court. Some high court, Bombay High Court says women should be allowed. Madras High Court says they should not be allowed to work in the night shift because as the women workers are required to take care of their house also. So in such a situation, we can also verify whether the liberalizing labor law to the extent of allowing women workers in the night shift and extending the hours of work from under the Factories Act. Now the maximum hours of work per day is 8 hours. Of course, there is a provision for overtime of not more than 2 hours a day and subject to maximum of not exceeding 54 hours a week. And now in some states they have made an amendment to the labor law, and whereby they have increased the hours of maximum hours of work per week to 70 hours or 71 hours. Okay, so these are the various areas wherein we can undertake research as to whether the proposed amendments or amendments which have been already brought in by some of the states are really useful or detrimental to the interests of the workers, and how far it will help for prosperity of the industry. So these are some of the areas even in which also we can undertake the research. We can undertake research in the area of workmen's compensation, or what we call now as employees compensation, as the law provides for payment of compensation in case of accidents resulting in either death or different types of disabilities. It may be even by contracting of diseases, particularly people working in hazardous industries like chemical industry and all. There is every possibility of contracting the diseases, thereby they may succumb to death, or even they may sustain some disability, means unable to discharge their work as they used to do prior to sustaining of such disability. So whether the Workmen's Compensation Court, the Employees Compensation Court, which is established under the law, is actually discharging its duties effectively, whether it is rendering justice to the needy in time effectively. So this is another area wherein you can do justice. Then ESI Act, effectiveness of the ESI law, wherein various benefits are made available to the insured workers. Of course, under the law, any factory, any workers who are employed in any factory or any industry or any establishment which can be considered as a factory are required to be compulsorily insured with ESI corporation by paying I think earlier it was 1.75% of employee and 4.75% of the employer. Now it is reduced to 4.5% all put together. I think 1.25 and 3.75. So whether the ESI organization, after insuring the workers and also taking contribution from every employee, whether they have been able to provide effective service in case of death, in case of disability, in case of providing of free medical service to the insured worker as well as his dependents. So all these aspects and even maternity benefit, etc., can also be subject matter of the research. Then employees provident fund law, also we can do research. And more particularly in case of contract labor, has become one of the big menace in every state throughout the country. Actually, as per the Contract Labor Regulation and Abolition Act 1970, the contract labor is permitted to be engaged only in case of intermittent nature of work, not for perennial nature of work. But unfortunately, government itself has become a big industry availing the service of the contract labor with an intention to avoid the direct recruitment. Okay, so particularly all group cadre D and C, group C and D employees are now being appointed on outsource basis, contract basis, wherein the employees are not directly employed, they are employed through a contractor. Okay, just with an intention to avoid the employer-employee relationship between the employer and all. I don't know the situation in Andhra, but in Karnataka, in almost all government organizations, even in our universities, the people are appointed on contract basis because all regular employees, many have retired, and there is no recruitment because of one or the other reasons. The recruitments are not conducted transparently, properly. So like that, the whole almost 50% in almost every government organization itself, we find people working on contract basis, and they are subject to exploitation. They are, in many cases, they are not paid with minimum wage. That is one of the important criteria, and minimum payment of minimum wage is considered to be a basic human right, and even it is considered as a concomitant right under Article 21 of the Constitution by Supreme Court in several cases, particularly in that Asiad Games case, wherein the people engaged were below the age of 14 years, and also they were not paid the minimum wage, and the Supreme Court has given direction to the government itself and not to engage the child labor and also pay the minimum wage. And even now the situation is not changed much. In many organizations will find the child labor, the labor without payment of engage the labor without payment of minimum wage. Okay, so the menace of contract labor is really rampant in almost every state, and they are being exploited. Of course, though they do good work better than the people in regular service, of course, there is a saying that once the regular salary starts, the people stops working. It's said by one of our professors very well that that what you call the salary, that is the same thing. Pagar chalu, kaam band. So once we start getting regular salary, good salary, then we'll stop working. Okay. So because of that or whatever it is, I don't know. Now the tendency of the government is not to go for regular recruitment of group C and D. And of course, by seeing the attitude of some of the people who are working in organizations, sometimes we also feel that it is correct, but it is inhuman and it is a violation of the rights when the person who is working as a clerk or a peon on a contract basis gets 10 to 12,000, but the same person, but the regular person who is employed in a regular service doing the same job will get 30 to 40,000 rupees. Though these contract workers do better job, but they are paid very less. So this is how the labor is being exploited in the name of contract labor. So this also can be one of the areas. Then, of course, the current burning problem is regarding the building and other construction workers issues. Many construction workers are engaged in construction activities through the contractors. They are not on proper facilities, even they are not registered. Okay, their health and safety are also not taken care. The education of their children is also sacrificed. So these are some of the things. Then minimum wages law. Then migrant labor's issue is very pertinent in the present pandemic situation. We have both interstate migrant laborers, intrastate migrant laborers, and even migrant labor working abroad. Okay, of course, we have a law providing for interstate migrant workers regulation of Employment Act 1979, wherein any migrant worker who is working away from his place, native place, it may be within the state or outside the state, even abroad, they are required to be registered with the authority, the labor department. But many a time they will not register at all. Will not be knowing who is working where, then whether any facilities are provided to him or her in the place of work, and particularly in a pandemic situation wherein many migrant workers working in Bangalore or Goa or Pune, Bombay or Hyderabad and almost all cities faced a lot of difficulties. Even they have suffered without the proper food. without facilities. Even they face a lot of difficulties to go back to their home places. Okay, we have all witnessed all these problems. So, what are the causes for migrant labor? So, this can be a very good area of to do a research. Why the people migrate from one place to another place or their native place to some other place? It is because of unemployment, lack of employment facilities. Okay, it may be because of some other reasons. We can very well identify. We can make a recommendation to the government as to how to prevent migrant labor, migration of labor, how to make the labor continue to stay in their native place and continue to get employment there only. And because of a huge migration, even the agriculturists are finding it very much difficult to get labor. And more particularly because of this Narega and all that, the agriculturists, particularly small and marginal farmers, they are unable to do their agriculture because in Narega they pay 300 and or some more salary wage, whereas a poor farmer is unable to pay that much and avail the labor, and that too the nature of work is very this thing very light in Narega. They will sometimes they will just go and work for a few hours and then come back, and you know things how things are going on. Whereas in case if they are employed in agriculture field by a particular own agriculturist, then they extract work. So that's why I think that the in order to ameliorate the difficulties of the agriculturist, we should introduce a scheme whereby the persons hired in or provided employment in Narega should be made available to agriculture work. So whereby agriculture should pay 50% of wage and government shall pay 50%. So it will be helpful for both the government as well as the agriculture. At the same time, we can even support the agriculture, protect the agriculture, because India is an agrarian country. It's a country full of villages, people staying in villages, and people depending on agriculture. Almost more than 65 to 70% of people depends on agriculture. So we can support the agriculture also. We can in fact the take care of food security of the people. Okay, so these are some of the issues we can really seriously look into. We can make a systematic study. We can make a good recommendations to the government. Sometimes the government may also sincere to take the recommendations made by the researchers. Okay, it all depends upon how seriously we do the research and how forcefully we make our recommendations and make them to understand the recommendations and to implement and to ultimately help out the people. Then again, rural employment issues, then sexual harassment at workplace, of course, it is a common thing. Then immigration issues, particularly in case of workers employed abroad. But, all those aspects can also be covered. Then we can also suggest for, we can also, as I already stated, undertake research in the area of the enhancement of labor strength from 100 to 300 under ID Act. As I've told you, a series of laws are being introduced by several states. To what extent these reforms are in the detrimental to the interest of the workers. Even all these labor laws have been enacted not just like that. They have not percolated down from the heaven. There is a great fight. There's a long history of fight by the trade unions and workers in order to recognize their rights. Of course, that has been realized to some extent with the help of the International Labour Organization, ILO, and all that. So, friends, these are some of the areas wherein we can effectively conduct legal research in the labor laws or issues related to labor. And with this, I think I would like to conclude my presentation. And
question by one Mr. Kameshwar Rao Karra. Sir, many MPs and trade union leaders across the country have reservations about the Social Security Act 2019 bill presently before Lok Sabha. May I have your esteemed opinion on this?
Okay. So Social Security Act has been enacted already, and in fact, what are the changes which have been actually proposed under the Social Security Bill? I am not aware of, honestly speaking. So if the participant can inform as to what are the changes which have been proposed, then I can give my opinion on that.
Okay, sir. We'll move to the next question, sir.
Okay.
From Miss Kusuma, sir. Sir, from since Industrial Revolution, migration of labor is a big problem, and still it is continuing. How do we deal with this issue?
No, that's what. First, we will have to make a proper study as to what all are the causes for migration of labor. The main cause for migration of labor is that of non-availability of proper employment in their native places or within a particular vicinity. So, in order to get their basic needs fulfilled, and then they are constrained to move out of their place sometimes, and sometimes they may migrate to get better opportunities even though their basic needs are fulfilled. Or sometimes it may be even it may be a reason that in order to avoid staying in the joint families, some people may move out of the place. Okay, so there will be so many issues, and mainly as I understand, it is due to economic condition.
Yes, sir. Next question, sir, from Dr. Yedla Prabhakar. So the question is it possible to
Okay.
do research in labor law, qualitative and quantitative legal research during the pandemic?
You can do it. You can adopt the method of qualitative and quantitative method of research.
So,
Okay.
during the pandemic, like
Pandemic, we have to by ensuring our safety and maintaining the social distance, we can venture to do that.
okay, sir. From Dr. Surapalli Prashant, what are the tests to find out whether contract laborers are direct employees?
Pardon?
What are the tests to find out whether contract laborers are direct employees?
No, actually, as per the Contract Labor Regulation and Abolition Act, when the employee who is employed on contract basis completes 1 year of continuous service. So 1 year of continuous is nothing but if the worker works for 240 days in a period of 12 months. Okay, if he is employed in an industry or any organization situated above the ground, and it is 180 days if he is working in any mine or any establishment situated below the ground, then they are entitled for regularization. But accordingly, earlier, as per the decision of the Supreme Court, more particularly when Justice Krishna Iyer was the judge of the Supreme Court, in many cases the directions were given to the governments, even when the government employed the daily wage employees, contract employees, and all that for regularization. Accordingly, in Karnataka, I think in 85, 86, some 30,000 employees so employed were regularized. And recently, even in the last government, many employees employed on contract and daily wage basis. Daily wage or contract are same. It is almost one and the same, but different terminologies are used. Around 29,000 employees employed in the Panchayat Raj institution, particularly in Gram Panchayat and all, have been regularized by enacting a special law in Karnataka. And of course, the Supreme Court in one of the cases has held that regularization of contract labor into service would amount to backdoor entry. It will violate Article 14 of the Constitution or Article 16 of the Constitution and Article 16 of the Constitution, because every citizen has a fundamental right to employment, public employment, more particularly in case of government organizations.
Yes, sir. Next question, sir, from Mr. Daya Bhumesh. Does the government have right to terminate or remove from service any corporation employees like the TSRTC case last year during the strike, if they go on strike when there is under the ESMA Act in effect, there is ESMA Act in effect.
Okay. No, sometimes the government do resort to such actions. Essential Services Maintenance Act under those provisions, but it all depends upon courts. In case when the matter when such termination is challenged, some courts may look into the matter uh, liberally, and some courts may take it very seriously and say that the termination is not valid. So it is we cannot tell exactly in with what will happen. Okay, there is a probability.
Okay, sir. Next question from Mr. P. Nishit. The question is, are there any negative implications of granting industry status to sports?
Of course, as per decision of the Supreme Court in Rajappa's case, even sports clubs and such organizations are considered as industry. If the sports service is made available by employing some people, particularly 10 or more persons, and 10 or more persons, particularly in some sports clubs and all that, many people will be employed to maintain the ground or to provide catering service and all that. It can be considered as an industry because employees employed whether in sports club or in hotel or in industry, they also need some social security protection. They have to be paid with minimum wage and some protection of service and all that. But unfortunately, in many private organizations presently, uh, the the uh, the service conditions and social minimum social protection is also not being given, and that's what there is an exploitation because the supply is more than demand, because we are facing a problem of unemployment. The people are finding it difficult to find the jobs, so they will feel that something is better than nothing. If they insist on minimum wage and all those facilities and all that, then tomorrow they may say that you no need to come to work because there are other number of other people who are in queue to receive whatever the wage that is given and to work. So this is the situation.
Yes, sir. Next question from Kunta Rajesh. Rajesh. In this pandemic situation, most of the employers have removed their employees or laborers in the company without informing priorly, and they are losing their lives. In this situation, is there any remedy under labor law to protect their job?
No, of course, the government itself in this pandemic has directed all the organizations not to remove any employees and also to continue to pay them the salary. And in case if they have not paid the salary removed, then it is all unlawful. As it is as per directions issued by central government as well as state government, and even courts have also gone to the rescue of the come to the rescue of the workers. But unfortunately, some industries, particularly MSME, small and medium scale industries, who are unable to afford to pay wages, or if particularly in case of the uh, uh, the companies which are not running under profit, so they also have some constraints, and out of such constraints some companies have removed. Then again it is a issue to be decided later by the government or by the courts. So sometimes they say that they will justify that we ourselves are suffering without any production, without any earning, and or sometimes even we are only running under loss. We are paying a lot of this thing interest to the banks. Of course, the banks also have been directed not to ask for the installments and all if there is a loan and all. Sometimes some people, just to avoid payment of wages without extracting the work, they will take some differences, some this thing cause or a reason just to avoid. So it all depends upon the government in power to take stringent action considering their financial condition. Okay.
Okay, sir. Sir, next question by Mr. Sudhakar. Sir, can you kindly distinguish between rights disputes and interest disputes in industrial adjudication?
Okay, in that is rights disputes and interest disputes are same almost. Okay, then individual dispute, sorry, the rights disputes are regarding right to continue in employment. Okay, by individual workers, particularly in case when the worker is terminated from service or retrenched from service unlawfully, he has a right to continue in the employment. So interest dispute is that those disputes wherein all the workers are commonly interested in a particular benefit, maybe increase in the salary or wages of the workers, bonus, or any such customary benefits or concessions like that.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Question by Miss Neha Agarwal, sir. What is the relevance of labor laws in a gig economy? Since we frequent
In the,
gig economy, since we see
what
frequent,
is that gig economy?
uh, there is no clarification regarding it,
Now
sir.
ask her to give explanation as to what is GIG.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
Sir, next question, sir. Why central government not considering an umbrella legislation for ensuring a minimum level of protection for workers as recommended by second NCL recommendation?
No, in fact, the central government also is very much interested to bring reforms in the labor law, and now, as the labor laws, or particularly laws pertaining to social security, are scattered under different legislations. For example, ESI Act, that Minimum Wages Act, Payment of Wages Act, then the what do you call Provident Fund and Miscellaneous Provisions Act, Payment of Gratuity Act, and all that. So they are planning to bring these laws in four codes, different codes, as per the latest this thing recommendations of some committee. So it is now presently on the course of the government, but there are some changes which have been proposed in those codes, which the laborers or labor unions, trade unions are considering as detrimental to the interest of the workers. So now they want to bring all the social security laws under one code, the code of social security. All industrial relations laws like Industrial Dispute Act and Trade Unions Act under one code. Then all wage-related laws, minimum wage, payment of wage, etc., under one. Like that, and also, so they are planning to bring out four codes, and of course, social security is provided as it is under the law, but given the situation of lack of the economic this thing, because we need to have economic stability to ensure social security of everyone. As it is now, there is a demand for liberalization of the labor laws by some of the organizations, and governments are also considering the interest of the industries and factories in the name of development and generation of employment. They are liberalizing the labor laws, and they are saying that the application of Factories Act, as now it is applicable for 20 persons, of course 10 or more persons, if they are conducting activity with use of power, and 20 or more than 20% with or without use of power. So now they want to enhance the limit of application of the Factories Act from 20 to 40. So whereby in case of factories employing less than 40 workers, they need not have to comply with requirements under Factories Act. They need not have to register. They need not have to strictly provide the safety, health, and welfare measures as per the standards prescribed under the Factories Act. So, in the guise of liberalizing the liberalized policy, and with an intention to support the industries and all that, they are taking away the minimum basic support or social security that is required for the working class. And even as I have told you, in case of Industrial Dispute Act also, presently for closure of an industry or for return this thing closure, yeah, closure of industry, the organizations employing more than 100 workers are required to take permission, prior permission of the government. Now they want to enhance that slab, that from 100 to 300. So all those industries who are employing less than 300, they will keep employment, this thing, average employment ratio as 299. They will not make it 300. If they make it 300, if they want to close down industry, they will have to take prior permission of the government. If it is 299, they need not have to take. So like that, they want to give some free hand in the name of what you call liberalizing Inspectorate Raj. At the other hand, we also have to look into the protection and social security of the poor persons who are employed in factories and industries. That's what many trade unions and political opposition, political parties, and all that, and many right-thinking people are even protesting against this. Okay.
Sir, we have received clarification regarding gig economy, sir, from
Yeah.
Neha Agarwal. Sir, she says that it is a gig economy is characterized by temporary employment or employment of freelancers, unlike traditional economy where permanent employment is a norm. Like economies where there are contracts, work contracts for which are not permanent, like on-call workers or temporary workers, sir, on-demand companies.
For example, these BPOs and LPOs
Yes.
and all.
Yes, sir. Flipkart, BPOs, LPOs, all this, sir.
That is there. They are all new form of this thing are coming out, and we need to evolve laws to protect the interest of those people also. They are, of course, now almost it is like condition of people working in unorganized sector like agriculture, construction activities, and all that. They are treated as unorganized activities now. As it is, the number of persons who are employed ratio wise is hardly 4 to 5% in the organized sector, like government sector and organized industries, factories, and all. But almost 93-94% of the people are in the unorganized sector, working in agriculture sector or brick and kiln industries or such activities, BD making, or they're all unorganized activities, no? Construction activities, construction labor, or people working in such other activities are called unorganized workers. So that's the reason why government has come out with several beneficial programs like providing of free ration, and in particularly in this pandemic, it's the direction of the government that they should not insist for ration card and all to give ration. People, particularly migrated workers, they will not be having ration card sometimes, so they have to also be given the ration benefit. So, and such programs are there now. Many government beneficial programs are there coming out with, and health insurance schemes, then providing of the free bicycles or free books or uniforms. There are and midday meal scheme. They're all beneficial schemes, no? To some extent to provide social security to the people. Okay. So thank you. I must thank all the participants for their patient hearing and also interacting very nicely at the end. I don't know how far I have been useful, but I am very much benefited by interacting with all of them. Thank you.
Sir, it's a wonderful lecture, sir. On behalf of the University College of Law, Osmania University, and on behalf of the participants, I thank you for your non-stop 2 hours lecture, sir. Without any break, you have gone for 2 hours continuously, right from 5:30 to 7:30. I thank you very much, sir. And I thank you for your insight, in-depth subject, relating the subject with the research as such, and you also discussed about the employer-employee issues, the right from a dispute to the law, fact to legislation, and you also discussed about the industrial disputes and lacunas in the labor issues. Issues like it may be the codes, the migrant issues, or daily labor issues, contract labor issues, or they may be relating to sexual harassment. And also you discussed about the lacunas in the government as such. And the overall result is the focus was on the social justice as such. Thank you so much for your giving us your valuable time, and I also acknowledge Professor G.B. Reddy sir for referring you as our resource person.
Thank you very much.
Permission from the principal, madam.
Okay.
Thank you very much for.
Yes.
In fact, this is only in addition to what our Madam Dr. Vijayalakshmi is trying to say. I thank you very much for a very wonderful disposition of labor laws, because I found that this is one area where lot of research needs to be done. And we have seen number of professors migrating from labor laws to contract laws to I don't know what kind of laws, instead of making an in-depth research. But you are one person who continued with the teaching research in this particular area. In fact, I was unfortunate to have missed.
Sir, though with some migration in between. Though with my migration in between.
No, but again, that is also related because Professor Nadagowda has been the founding registrar of the Rural Development University, the first of its kind, established at Gadag. And then he was also acting vice chancellor for a considerable period of time. And one person, in fact, who is always open to, new things. Therefore, I feel that your presentation is to be really useful to those, young teachers and scholars who are going to specialize in this particular area. So we take this opportunity once again, sir. It's a privilege to have you with us. Thank you very much. Now over to Principal Ma'am.
Thank you very much, sir, for kindly inviting me and providing me an opportunity. To you and
no, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure, sir. It is our privilege. Our privilege. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your nice words, and we also thank you for recommending and referring such a good, excellent labor law teacher. And I also thank our resource person, Professor Nadagowda, for accepting readily our invitation and delivering an interesting topic in spite of the long session today. I appreciate the patience, and I thank once again the resource person Nadagowda sir, and also all the participants. And by this, I conclude the session for today. Thank you, and good night for all of you.